Lord.
Look, I can't
We're going to have to do something about that.
Yes, we're going to call to order. Michelle?
Member Burke?
Here.
Member Fig?
Here.
Member Nast?
Here.
Ex officio
Here.
Member Norda? Here. Vice Chair Schnapp? Here. Chair Spiegel?
Here. Can't hear my name. Now I'm going to have hearing aid. Okay, the agenda.
So I would like to propose, Madam Chair, that we move the, let's see, we were going to have, was it the board member?
Open forum.
Oh, open forum, number 8, moved up. And I think it was recommended that we move it up after consent items. Is that the right idea?
That's correct.
Okay.
Okay, on the open forum, anybody wishing to speak to the board on any matter that is not on the agenda? Okay, next. The consent items?
So what I was proposing, Madam Chair, is to actually move the item.
Yes, to 8 over to.
8 to right above consent items.
Right above, in between agenda and consent?
Right? Yeah, because we have a presentation.
Okay. Then
So I think
two
if there's a second on the motion, or,
second.
okay,
We're through.
okay,
Okay.
go right ahead.
Ms. Mulligan?
Thank you for having me. Rod asked me to come give an update on California water fix. There's been a lot going on in the last 6 months, lots of politics and twists and turns, and I'm going to take you through it. And I'd like to introduce Director Andres Santa Maria, who is on the Callejas board and represents Port Hueneme and South Oxnard. So any hard questions, just direct those over to Director Santa Maria. So let me get this started. Let's see. I'm just working this mouse. There. Okay. So as I said, I'll give an update on California Water Fix. I'm going to talk about just an overview of the state project. I think most of you know what it is, but just a quick overview of where the water comes from, some history on Water Fix, and then what's next. So this is the state project, and we're going to do a flyover so that you can see where the water for this area comes from. This is the Callejas service area. So you buy imported water from Callejas, and we deliver water from Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks out to the Port Hueneme area. And the water comes all the way from the Feather River watershed, which is up north of Lake Oroville, and it is almost as big as all of Southern California from Ventura County all the way to the Mexican border. It's a very large watershed, as you might have noticed when we had all the rain in Oroville, and it couldn't handle it. It produces a lot of water sometimes. And down at the bottom right of that picture is Lake Oroville, which is the beginning of the State Water Project. So all of the water that comes to Ventura County comes from there. We have very little ability to access Colorado River water. We have a fairly small pipe that delivers Colorado River water to us, so we never get it except during emergencies or droughts. Water comes through the Sacramento Delta, which I will explain a bit more about later, and comes down to the south end. You can see that yellow line. That's the California Aqueduct. We pump out of the South Delta, bring the water into the California Aqueduct. That leg off to the right goes to the Bay Area. The leg that goes kind of left comes to Southern California, almost 400 miles from Lake Oroville to Southern California. So we'll follow the California Aqueduct. Sorry, I'm clicking. Oh, there it is. So follow the California Aqueduct down, all the way down the state. and it comes down to our service area. Those lakes up top are Pyramid and Castaic Lake, and that is the end of the west branch of the State Water Project. The water then goes into pipes shown in red, owned by Metropolitan Water District. I'm going to stop moving this mouse around because it's a problem. The ones in Santa Clarita and San Fernando Valley are owned by Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and the pipes within the blue area in Ventura County are owned by Cayugas. Cayugas actually takes ownership of the water in Chatsworth. And we deliver the water all the way out to Oxnard, and then water flows through pipes owned by Oxnard to get to Port Hueneme. This next slide shows the percentage of water used in each of these areas that's imported. And you can see Simi Valley and Thousand Oaks are essentially 100% imported. Out on the Oxnard Plain, you have a lot more local supplies. And right now, Port Hueneme is taking about 20% of its supply as imported water. Really, you're the least dependent on us of any, although I expect with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, you'll be ending up buying more water from us as the groundwater basin is less. So overall in that area, 75% of the water is imported for the needs of the people in our area. So let's talk about history. The State Water Project was started in 1951 and ended up getting built by Governor Brown's father, Pat Brown. And back in 1951, they envisioned something that they called the Delta Cross Channel that would take water from the Sacramento River north of the Delta down to the south end by where the pumps are. But they kind of ran out of water, and Pat Brown wanted to build Lake Oroville to deal with flood control and make it big enough for that, and they didn't have the money to build the Delta Cross Channel to take the water from the Sacramento River. So they just dumped it in the Delta, which, you know, when you first hear about that, it seems kind of strange. It just goes into the Delta at the north end and comes out the south end. In the early 1980s, there was a vote to build a peripheral canal. It failed. That was under Governor Brown and in his first term. And this is now how the water comes. So it comes from Lake Oroville, down the Sacramento River, and just flows through the Delta between a bunch of islands that have farms on them and down to the south pumps. And there are quite a few problems with that, and I'll talk about that. So 150 years ago, before the gold rush, before people started farming there, the Delta was an estuary. It had marshes and grasses and lots of places for fish to hide and food for the fish. And it was a good place for fish. The salmon swam up the San Joaquin, Sacramento rivers, and the little salmon came down and they ate and they got big and fat before they went to the ocean. But today, it looks like that. You have big wide channels. The edges of the channels have rock on them. There's no place for the fish to hide. There's nothing for them to eat. They get out to the ocean as small fish and they don't make it because they haven't had food and they haven't got fat on the way out to the ocean. So there's a problem with the ecosystem in the Delta right now. Additionally, you might be able to see it here. Those are levees along the edges of the farms, and the farms have settled quite a bit since they started farming about 150 years ago. And this is what happened. Before 1850, it was all a marshland with productive peat, and that makes good farmland. But as you farm it, it settles, and it's gotten deeper and deeper and deeper, and they've had to build up these levees to keep the water out. They put rock on the edge of the levees so there's no place for the fish to hide, but these levees are made out of this squishy peat. It's not good engineered material, and that's what's up there. And you've got seawater rising a little bit over time and more subsidence, so those have to get taller and taller. And here's what the Delta looks like. This is actually as of about 5 years ago. So you've got the red areas on that screen more than 15 feet below sea level. Now, why should we care? I'll get to that. The chance of an earthquake that could take out lots of levees is about 2/3 in the next 30 years. And what happens if you take out a lot of levees? Well, remember, they're below sea level. So this is an image of a major, oh, could you hit previous for me? Just hit P. Or can I use this? So this is a video of an earthquake event in the Delta. They're estimating many levees fail, and you'll see what happens when one fails. They get breached, and because they're below seawater, water flows into them. And these islands that are really more like holes because they're below sea level start filling with water. And remember, this is the pathway through which our water supply comes. And we're panning out. And you'll see in just a minute, the red is going to show the seawater coming in, and it'll go back and forth with the tide. So you see that seawater's coming in because we're below sea level, the seawater's flowing into the delta. And there, down at the south end, there our water supply just turned into seawater, and we can't use it. And there's some discussion that perhaps they could build rock barriers and make a barrier from north to south across the delta to get fresh water through. We're dubious that that's really feasible. So if this happens, it may be that tunnels would need to be built from the north of the delta to the south of the delta on an emergency basis. And even on an emergency basis, you're talking about 6-8 years to get them built. So this is the main reason Callejas is concerned about the situation in the delta and why we want tunnels underneath it. So let's go through. There's also some other problems in the delta. The eco's under stress from, we already talked about agriculture replacing habitat, wastewater discharges from the farms, from City of Sacramento, invasive species like bass that are not native species, but they like to eat smelt and baby salmon, and toxic pollutants also coming off of the agriculture. So there's some challenges. And then the challenge that's really related to water is that the natural flows in the delta are from the Sacramento River, which is in the north, out to the San Francisco Bay, and from the San Joaquin River, which is in the south, out to the San Francisco Bay. But when we pump in the South Delta, we pull the flows all in funny directions, and it confuses the fish, and it's bad for the fish. And the tunnels resolve that problem, because what we do is we take flows off the Sacramento River up in the north, and we don't take much flow. So if the flows are high, we can take a certain amount. If the flows are low, we can take none or a very small amount. So the flows stay the same as they are naturally, which is better for the fish. So again, looking back in the history, starting in about 1990, people were becoming aware of harm to salmon and smelt. And then in 2007, we had a big decision. That's a picture of the pump station in the South Delta. It's called the Wanger decision, and it significantly cut off our ability to move water out of the South Delta. So what happened as a result of that, this is a graph, and what it shows is the percentage of all the state water users' allocations that they've been getting since the beginning of the project. And you can see 1968 through about 1990, we were pretty close to 100% almost all the time. That red line is a 10-year running average, and you can see how that's decreased. 1990 was when the first biological stopping of the pumps began, and it's just gotten tougher and tougher over time. There's some droughts mixed in there, but you can see we're now getting less than 50% of what we were getting 30 years ago because those pumps are turned off. So the current push for tunnels under the delta started in November 2008 with Arnold Schwarzenegger. He and the legislatures made legislation that would restore the delta ecosystem, and I mentioned that has some problems, and also provide a more reliable supply for the state, financing, then it was a canal system to transport water from north to south. As they started to study it, they realized that a canal is going to disrupt a lot of cities, and they came up with tunnels. So this is what it looks like today. You've got tunnels running from the north up along the Sacramento River, go all the way underneath the delta, and end up at the forebay where we have pumps already. So it'll just put the water where there's pumps already. 2 40-foot diameter pumps and 9,000 CFS, which is a lot of flow, but a lot less flow than the peripheral canal had been. So the benefits: it protects the water supply from earthquake and levee failures, provides drought protection because we don't have the fish restrictions, we can move more water during wet years and save it for dry years. It prepares for climate change. With sea level rise, those levees are just more and more at risk. and then just minimize the uncertainty of our system. So this is that same chart I showed you with the allocations. We expect that with WaterFix, the allocation goes up to about 69% on average. We don't get back to 100 like it was back in the early days. But without WaterFix, we think it's going to drop from what it is now down to maybe the mid to low 30% on average as more and more biological opinions happen. And frankly, that's until the delta becomes an inland sea. Once it becomes an inland sea, we're done, unless we have tunnels. There's no more water. So what happened between when Arnold came up with the legislation and last year? Lots and lots of studies, reports, permits, CEQA documents, hearings, opposition. It's been 10 years of hard grinding work that ended last fall in 2017. That's when sort of the recent action began. And one by one, most of the state project contractors committed to fund their share of WaterFix. So there are two projects that get water out of the Delta. You've got the state water project that comes from Oroville and pumps in the South Delta. You have the Central Valley project that stores water in Shasta, comes down the same Sacramento River, and they have another set of pumps right next to the state project ones. The Central Valley project is run by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation. It's a federal project. State Water Project obviously is run by State Department of Water Resources. So they're parallel but very different projects, and they're operated differently, as you'll see. So the state project contractors committed to fund their share. About 90% of them committed. Kern County committed about half of theirs, which is most of that 10%. But the other state project contractors were interested in buying into the WaterFix capacity that the 10% hadn't bought into. So state project was good, and for Metropolitan, which is a little over, about a quarter of the total, they were looking at 337,000 acre feet they were expecting by increasing that average yield from the state project. So quite a bit of water. Household cost, just under $2 per month per household to get this benefit. And this is how it compared to other alternative supplies. So very reasonable cost for supply compared to alternatives. Okay, the Central Valley contractors didn't commit, and there was a little bit about this in the paper, and I want to give you a little background on what happened. This is an assistant general manager at Metropolitan. He used to work at the Central Valley project, and he's talking about why they didn't commit last fall. And he's going to talk about exchange contractors. They are entities that gave up their rights to be part of the Central Valley project. They had some other water rights that got hurt by the Central Valley project, and so they have senior rights in the Central Valley project. In the state project, nobody has senior rights. Everybody's equal on that project, but Central Valley has different tiers. So he's going to talk about that. And when you hear the words exchange contractors, that's what it means.
It's a project that has different status of contractors within it. So unlike the State Water Project, where we all share and share alike, the Central Valley Project is stratified into senior, which are water right holders that were there before the project was built. They essentially gave over their water rights in exchange for a contract that gives them first shot at deliveries. Congress came in 1992 and inserted a fishery priority and a refuge priority. So that comes in after the senior water right holders. 800,000 acre feet of the project was dedicated to fisheries, and there's a priority for delivering refuge water, which actually comes across the delta and is delivered through the same system as the water to all of the contractors. So the refuges have a priority on that. They have an M&I preference. Unlike the state project, ag and M&I are the same. On the CVP, as a matter of policy, the urbans, the municipal users, such as Santa Clara, City of Tracy, those have a preference. And finally, the agricultural contractors, which are essentially the west side of the San Joaquin Valley, are the final in line, not by water right, but by contract. So we for years had tried to move the project forward, looking at cost follow the water and looking at the total water supply for both projects. If you look at total water supply from South Delta over time, it's broken down roughly 45-55. 45 to the CVP, 55 to the state. That's without Cal WaterFix. That's just kind of how things have worked over the years. So the assumption had been, up until the vote started to be taken, that That would be the allocation and breakdown of the project, 45% of the cost and 45% of the benefits that come directly from Cal Water Fix. So everybody would be paying their share, including some contribution by exchange contractors and the refuge folks. Last September, the Bureau of Reclamation put out what they called their participation policy, which was the first time that they said a couple of things that really turned the corner with CVP, and that was, one, we are not going to require any payment from the exchange contractors. And two, we're not going to require any payment for delivery of refuge water supply. So that's a third of their contracts south of the Delta that now, by policy of the Bureau of Reclamation, are off the table. They're not going to pay. The other thing Reclamation included in the policy is they fuzzed up the notion of whether if you invest, we'll give you assurance that you get that water. So up until this policy came out, it had been the assumption, with concurrence of Bureau of Reclamation, at least verbally, if you make an investment in a slice of Cal Water Fix, your proportionate share of the benefits for water supply will have your name on it. It's available for you to use. When they put this policy out in September, they did away with that protection by adding language that essentially says, it's yours unless we need it for some other project purpose. And that, combined with taking a third of the payers off the table, made things difficult.
So you can understand why they wouldn't have wanted to commit. They would put money in and they'd get no guarantee of getting water out of it. So they didn't commit. The governor was working with them. Months go by. February, the governor announces, okay, we're downsizing the project. We're just going to build one tunnel. We can't get the Central Valley on board. We'll build the second tunnel some other time down the road. So what they were going to do, interestingly, they didn't exactly cut the tunnel project in half. There are 3 intakes off the Sacramento River that are 3,000 cubic feet per second each. They decided to build 2 of them. The tunnels are actually 7,500 CFS, and they decided to build a pump station at 6,000. So the way they were doing it, where the original project was 9,000, they downsized it to 6. And they were going to figure out a way for the state project to use the 6,000 CFS capacity. And then they would build the other tunnel, and the Central Valley would get 3,000 at some future date through the other tunnel. Well, here's the challenge with that. They had to do a supplemental EIR. Now we're in February. You have less than a year of the governor's term left. They have to do a supplemental EIR. They have to do more Endangered Species Act permitting, and likely to extend permitting past the governor's term, and none of these folks proposing to be our governor support the tunnel project. So one tunnel might very well mean 0 tunnels, because it can't get done while he's still governor, which was a real concern to us. Then right after he went to the 1 tunnel, there's a permit before the state board to change the point of diversion. The Delta counties, farmers in the Delta, environmental groups, all filed a motion to stop the hearings. The project has changed. It's 1 tunnel. You got to start over. We need to redo our testimony. So also bad. So February 12th, Metropolitan staff present to their board how 1 tunnel will work. Now it's divided up differently, where they were getting 337, now they're getting 410,000 acre feet because there's a bigger share for the state project. The price has gone up a little bit, 190 to 240 per month, still kind of in the same range. And then this happened. The director started asking for something.
Director Atwater.
It seems to me the expense of the project is much lower than we assumed. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, we thought this was a $5 a month charge. It's $2 nominally. When you look at it, and you remember that this was sized and scaled at 9,000 second feet to maximize the environmental benefits to meet statewide needs, what I'd like to do is ask the staff, if they can over the next month, fully consider doing both tunnels at the same time now, just because in the San Joaquin Valley, they have a critical need, and they can't solve it without SGMA, groundwater overdraft. I just think for Metropolitan, if you want to show leadership, you really do want to build a project that maximizes the benefits, because one of the unfortunate criticisms of doing it in phases is, as a lot of the experts at PPIC and UC Davis have pointed out, The 9,000 second feet has much more environmental benefits. So staging it, and then you want to know when you're going to do the second phase will create a lot more controversy for us than it's worth. We'd be much better off. That's an investment you know will have a significant return on investment, because over time, the rest of the state's going to need that reliability.
So these three directors, including ours, Director Blois, weighed in and said, staff, tell us what would it take if we built both tunnels? How would that work? So the staff scrambled. A month later, they presented to their board how a 2-tunnel project would work. Basically, the state project contractors would do the 6,000 that they'd planned on for the 1 tunnel, and there'd be 3,000 unsubscribed. And certain of the state project contractors, including Metropolitan, would fund that, and then they would sell or lease it to Central Valley project contractors as they get their house in order. And they've got about 15 years to do that till the tunnels get built. They can lease capacity to those guys, they can sell capacity to those guys, and frankly, there's a reservoir, Sites Reservoir, proposed north of the Delta, and the state project contractors could actually move water from sites through that, or they could buy water from rice farmers and move it through it. So it's not without value, but it does add to the cost. So the staff went through how all this would work, how the contracts would work. Now we've got the cost. If nobody leased that extra capacity, which is unlikely, but they didn't have any guaranteed participants at the time they were presenting this, now you're looking at almost $5 per month per household for this project. So more money. How does that compare to the others? Well, you know, the upper end could be at the upper end of that new bar for water fix, but you're still less than other supplies that are available to the region, even if you never got anybody to use the second part of the tunnel. And you might not get it built if you have 1 tunnel, because you can't get the permitting done under Brown. But we all got a memo on April 2nd saying, okay, we're back to 1 tunnel. Brown says 1 tunnel, we're back to 1 tunnel. Okay, and I was sending emails out to Akbar as this was going on. Well, the board members refused to take that for an answer. They weren't comfortable with the 1 tunnel. The primary driver is that they thought we wouldn't get the project built if we had 1 tunnel. And they insisted that the board at least be given an option to vote for 2 tunnels. And I'm not going to play this video from him, this audio from him. Basically, the reason that Roger Patterson says the CVP contractors will ultimately invest, even though they can't now, is USBR has committed to work on the if you pay, you get benefit concept that they haven't worked on. And the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is going to cut back their supplies by about 1.5 to 2 million acre feet per year. They're going to be desperate for water. So they've got to work it out. So I think it's reasonable to assume that they're going to pay for that tunnel. They just can't do it now.
What?
I guess skip that. So the day before the Metropolitan Board meeting and the vote, in the afternoon, a letter comes out from Governor Brown. And it says, tomorrow you have a historic decision. Staging construction may be plausible, but will actually risk serious delay in permitting and jeopardize the entire project. Your perseverance has led California to this moment. Please don't back away now. And he made some phone calls. And that was the day before the meeting. So we went down to the meeting, and I want to play you because there was some support and some people who voted against the project. LA and San Diego both voted against the project, and pretty much everybody else did vote for it, which makes for some interesting politics. And I've got maybe a little bit of board members talking about it that I think will be interesting to you, because it really gets to the politics to hear them talk.
The resolutions are essentially giving the general manager a blank check to do any and all things necessary or convenient with regard to this project. Pretty broad authority. We just can't support this without further time to assess the impacts this to our ratepayers.
This issue for me is personal. Over 60 years ago, when my granddad retired as general manager of LADWP, he was asked by Governor Brown 1.0 to be vice chair of the Feather River project. He spent the next 4 or 5 years working on that project, yet that was a phased project that never had a phase 2 ever built. So I have a frustration with phased projects. I'm very supportive of the full project, even though I know LA and San Diego are looking to reduce their MET demands, and I commend them for that. But please don't step in the way of the other major energy agencies that don't have the wherewithal to do the same thing, that still need reliable water supply, not only for their grandchildren, but for their grandchildren's grandchildren.
For us up north, this is an existential issue. This project is better for the environment. It's the cheapest source of new water that's available to us currently. It provides us much greater reliability, which is what Cayugas absolutely needs, and flexibility that goes with that. It mitigates the future effects of climate change. And for those reasons, for many more, I urge your support of the twin tunnel option.
Keep in mind something that has been said here many times. We cannot conserve what we do not have.
One of the things that obviously was clear to me was that you're basically paying an extra $6 billion with no extra water. And that to me seems quite alarming. So, the city of Los Angeles and Mayor Garcetti made it clear that the city wants to transform their water infrastructure and move to 50% local water by 2035. And frankly, I'm very fearful of what the impacts of this approach will be on the region's move to local water. And if MWD customers spend $11 billion plus, what will this do to MWD's ability to invest in local water? What will it do to the public's appetite to invest in local water projects that create local jobs and provide additional local benefits such as flood control and water quality? And also, I'm afraid this is obviously going to be extremely divisive on the board, and I'm very, very concerned about that. And moving forward on a project that the two largest cities in the state don't support, it doesn't set a very good precedent as well. And so just to close, using sort of a house analogy, you can buy a house for $1 million or you can buy the same house for $2 million. It doesn't really make any sense to buy that same exact house for $1 million and get nothing addition, the same exact house, and paid twice the price. By paying more than twice the cost, you're getting the same exact amount of water to Metropolitan Water District customers.
People really are, one unpaid bill away from being homeless. We should take that seriously. I can't support doing this. I wish there was more time to talk about this.
With regard to having more time to evaluate the option, I would just like to note that we asked staff 2 months ago to look at this alternative of financially backstopping the rest of the project. It's not funding 100% of the whole project. It's paying the part that we were going to pay for our part of the project and then backstopping the unsubscribed portion. We still have state water project contractors. At this point, there are uncertainties. It's uncertain that we'll have other people come in from the CBP later to pick up any of these costs. I think personally that it's quite likely that we will, but it is uncertain. My position today is that even if we assume that they never come in, this project is worth it for us to do based on the benefits that we'll receive for the costs that we pay. In the presentations that I sat through from staff, it was clearly described that if we do only one tunnel instead of two, we do have reduced benefits. It's not the same project for twice the money. We have less water supply benefits, less water quality benefits, less species benefits, less reliability if we do half the project. But there are uncertainties. But even with the project uncertainties, we know from a price perspective that even within the range of price uncertainties, this is still the most cost-effective source of water for us compared to any of the other sources that we have still said that we're going to evaluate, and we're still going to invest in those projects as appropriate. But this is the most cost-effective alternative that we have for our water supply reliability, even within the range of the price uncertainties. And I think also that the greatest uncertainties that I see out there have to do with the reliability of our other sources of supply, and particularly with climate change, which is going to strain the Colorado River even more and is going to strain local supplies here even more. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to make a decision when we have no uncertainties. I think it's our job to weigh the uncertainties and make the best decision that we can.
I joined in the comments that have been made by the LA delegation.
Do we have the information that we need to make a vote today? Of course we do. Are there risks attendant to making a decision today? Of course there are. Is there a risk of inaction? And is that risk greater? In my opinion, of course it is. inaction is the worst thing we can do. One of our public speakers alluded to the failures of New Orleans to prepare. Can you imagine how we feel if we didn't do what's necessary and unfortunately the Delta is inundated?
I just wanted to highlight this question about rate impacts, just to remind how we're financing this project. It's mostly on the variable rate. And for the city of Los Angeles, I would think it would highly motivate you to develop your alternative supplies if you can develop those cost effectively. If you truly develop alternative supplies, you're not going to be paying for your proportionate costs. The other member agencies will be paying for that.
While I support this project, I can't support a vote that is going to put our ratepayers at financial risk and bear the burden of a water fix for the entire state of California when less than a week ago we were told by the state agencies that they were refusing to pay. This board will be very divided. The two largest agencies and the two largest cities, San Diego and Los Angeles, don't stand with you, and we bear the largest burden to pay for this.
My concern is that in the future we will be hearing that there's not enough money to pay for local projects and conservation projects that I think are critical for our region.
They voted
I
against
just don't
too.
believe that that's a part of the whole overall plan. So that's why I'm not supporting it.
An analogy of a $1 million to a $2 million house was made by Director Gold. You know, the difference is between those two houses is the $2 million house is going to get built. The $1 million house will probably not be built. People earlier said this has been a 12-year process. Actually, it's been almost a 60-year process. Originally, the canal was to be included in the State Water Project, but Pat Brown wanted Oroville to be built because he wanted the flood control. That's a testament to how projects never get finished. This project can be finished.
I, too, am a single mother and live on a limited income. But as you think about rates, you also have to think about being able to provide the water. And I think that my duty on this board is to make sure my 10-year-old daughter can fix her daughter a glass of water. And I think that I have been adequately provided with all the information that I think I need to support this project. You can't continuously procrastinate. If you sit on a board, you have to be able to make a decision, and I think my decision here is for the future, so I say let's move forward.
I was reluctant to spend this money. Anybody that knows me knows that I am so tight that I squeak when I walk. But I thought about how important it is to defend the investment we already have in the State Water Project. Our yield there continues to dwindle because of outside influences on the Delta. This is a way to preserve the investment we've already made. This is a way to preserve, again, the future for the children that we all love so very much. The price we're paying here, while it is significant, is one that needs to be taken a look at by virtue of what it does for our economic structure. There were people talking about the poor people that can't pay their bills or pay their mortgage. Without a water supply, our job supply dries up. And if that dries up, it's a lot harder to pay for the bills that you're going to have submitted.
I don't live to make life difficult for Los Angeles. I think I work very hard to try to be accommodating. I do find it interesting that you're the only agency that has the ability to decide which imported water that you choose, and the one that you're not interested in is one that I depend on. When my agency has pretty much done everything we can do to utilize all our local projects. We recycle all of our water. We do groundwater
LA has
desal.
not done that.
I'm also a little concerned that I almost get the impression that San Diego feels like, my gosh, you're not taking us seriously. And you know, you kind of get what you give sometimes. So
They sue Metropolitan
all these
all the
things go into my mind as I figure out what's best for this organization. And I say this because I'm not one that believes in a phased project. I don't believe that second tunnel will ever happen if we do it under a phasing program. So I believe that this is our one time to vote on 2 tunnels. It's our one time to vote on what we know after 10 years and $250 million of study is the best for the environment and is best for water supply reliability. If we don't vote on moving forward with that today, I think that option's over with. I also believe that ag will be there, and I understand why they're not today. But I know firsthand what Sigma feels like. And
He's a farmer.
15 years down the road isn't going to come very fast, but in the interim, there's going to be a lot of ground going out of production. I'm convinced of that. As far as this being an emergency that was created, do we want to wait for Katrina and then say, okay, let's go deal with it? It's going to take us 15 years. I don't think that's appropriate. I think we have examples out there that say the time is now. And I believe that we're doing the right thing by making the statement that we believe this is the right way to go. We don't think ultimately we're going to be paying all of it. We think for a number of reasons, other agencies will step up and say, we got to be in. We need that reliable water. But I have to say, as chairman of the board, if that were to happen, is it of value?
What happened? No, we are not doing that. The way he finishes, what happened to it? There. The way, don't look at that yet. The way he finishes is he says, I don't think that if the others don't step up, that our rate holders are going to be left holding the bag. Our rate holders are going to be left holding a very valuable asset. And then he says, with that, let's vote. And they voted. And this is the outcome. Everybody voted yes, except for Los Angeles, San Diego, Santa Monica, and San Fernando. So it passed about 60-40. So that was a pretty resounding yes vote. And I think the best way to understand why they voted that way really is to listen to them talk, which was why I took a little bit of time to play that for you. You now have a sense of where everybody was coming from, and they gave it a lot of thought. So what's been happening and what will be happening over the next few months, between April and June this year, the state project contractors are voting one by one whether to fund 1 or 2 tunnels. So far, Santa Clara County Water District, which is a pretty big participant, has voted to fund 2 tunnels. So Met's not the only ones in on 2 tunnels. A fairly large agency just south of the Delta called Zone 7 has also voted to fund 2 tunnels, and the rest of the contractors are all going to have to do it by the end of June. Another big one, Kern County, is voting this week, so you may see something on in the paper on that. Last week, the Delta Conveyance Design and Construction Authority was formed. This is the entity that will handle design and building of the contract, of WaterFix. And Metropolitan got 2 seats on the board, and our own director, Blois, is one of the members of the 5-member board. So he's a contractor and big supporter of WaterFix, so Ventura County's well represented. And next, they need to form a financing authority. That should be done in a few weeks. They'll award design contracts as soon as that's formed. They already have the proposals in hand. They just haven't opened them yet. They need to get a permit from the state board for diversion from the Sacramento River. That hopefully will happen by the end of the year. Those permit hearings have been going on already for a year. They need to obtain a consistency determination from the Delta Stewardship Council. Those are the 2 big permits that they need this year. And the goal is that the governor, the new governor, doesn't have to make any decisions or use any political capital on WaterFix. That all the hard stuff is done this year while Governor Brown is still governor. Time schedule, we are right at that line where it says start. They've already gotten a lot of the permits. They're in process on those last 2. About 4 years of design, about 13 years of construction, and then it'll be in service. They say this is conservative. They may be able to beat it, but probably not by a lot. So hopefully no earthquakes between now and then. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I know that was a little bit lengthy, but it's complicated, and it takes a little bit of time to go through the details. Any questions?
Okay, I probably don't know enough to ask intelligent questions, so I shouldn't. However, it looks to me like the state has withdrawn itself. They didn't want to build 2 tunnels. They could only afford 1 tunnel. And has anybody ever looked at the view? You know, it seems like we've gone from public risk to privatization of profits. I can't be any less ingenuous than that. What I'm thinking of is I think the state should, in the best of all possible worlds, there should be a state-public partnership where you get 2 tunnels built. The state's responsible for funding one of those tunnels, as they said they could. I understand the reason for the 2 tunnels, but if that's my first look at it, was why couldn't we have a public-private partnership, just in case things don't work out later on? The other one is that it looks like the act driver of this seems to be 63% preponderance of having a 6.7th earthquake. That's, you know, one of the arguments against the state water project is that we would get cut off because of an earthquake, because what are the construction designs earthquake-proof to withstand a 6.7 earthquake for the Sacramento tunnels? I guess is my question.
So I'll answer those in reverse order. I'll answer the earthquake one first. Yes, they are. It is a gasketed, it's panels, reinforced concrete panels that are gasketed between them so that they would be flexible in an earthquake. And they're about 60 feet below the bottom of the delta. They're underneath the peat and they're in sand, and they're designed to withstand an earthquake like that. In the event that a portion of the tunnel it came apart in an earthquake, which they're designed to handle it, it would be fairly easy to fix a part of the tunnel as compared to drilling 30-mile tunnels in after an earthquake. So they're designed to handle the anticipated earthquake. In answer to your first question, the concept has always been for building the tunnels that the water users pay. And that is how the state project portion is set up. The Central Valley portion is trickier because they have those wildlife refuges, and perhaps the federal government can pay for that part. But there's no private money, there's no general fund state money that goes to, or general federal money that goes to these projects. The idea is it's paid for by the water users.
Thank you.
Please. When you were talking about the 1 or 2 tunnel options and that there would be 70% of our water needs, was that with 2 or 1 tunnel? That was at the very beginning. We're never going to get back to our 100% allocation.
Right. That was 2 tunnels.
2 tunnels?
And it would be less with 1 tunnel.
70%.
Yeah, we would get up to 70%.
And would that mean that at that 70%, would we be able to fill all of our reservoirs in the southern part of the state?
It would depend, and let me correct myself. It's not 70% of our needs, it's 70% of the allocation that every state project contractor has.
Okay.
So it's actually less water than what we used to get 30 years ago. So it is not enough. The Colorado River supply, which we don't get directly, but we share with the rest of Southern California, is going to have to be reallocated because there's more demand than there is rainfall over the last few decades. So both our imported supplies are going to end up having less water than they did in the past. So we have to conserve, develop recycled water, do all those other things to manage to get by on less. Because even with water fix, we have less water.
So the reservoirs themselves, too, would not be full then?
Some years they would, some years they wouldn't. It would depend.
Okay.
And other options are buying water from rice farmers, fallowing land over on the Colorado River system. There are lots of ways to get water, and it's really all of those. Like kind of, rather than a silver bullet, it's silver buckshot. Okay, well, thank you for your interest.
Your presentation was very good. Thank you very much for being here and giving it to us.
Thank you.
The consent, anybody have any issue with the consent items?
No, move to approve.
Okay, I'll second it. And with that, we come to our business items. Okay. The brackish water reclamation demonstration. Who's going to be doing that?
Yes, Mr. Don Villafana, Public Works Director, will be handling this one.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Good afternoon, and my name's Don Villafana. I'm the Public Works Director, and I think you know that Mr. Hickox retired from the city, so between Akbar and I, we will be handling the PHWA proceedings. Tonight, or this afternoon, I have the brackish water, basically the operations report. It's recommended the board receive and file this report. This report presents the update on the operational status for the demonstration facility for the month of April. During this period, the overall Port Hueneme Water Authority demand averaged 3.1 million gallons per day, which is slightly higher than the previous reporting period. The facility was operated in the membrane production mode with United Water Conservation District supplying 83% and Cayugas supplying 17% of the water demand during this period. There were no interruptions of service. PHWA water continues to meet all state and federal regulatory standards. The silt density indexed SDI sample twice a day averaged 0.75, which is indication that lower levels of iron and manganese are entering the system. The threshold is 3. When it reaches 3, we will be shutting off the membranes. We've been operating since November, I believe, in membrane mode. And as reported previously, United has made some significant operational changes, which has allowed our plant to operate in the membrane production mode during the review period. They're operating their deep and shallow wells in a on and off schedule, which reduces the iron and manganese and allows us to do this. And, so the water supply allocation update, the emergency ordinance E sets the PHWA allocation at 3470 acre feet per year. And just for your information, the demand this last month was 3.1 million gallons. And if you extrapolate that out, that would be 3,285 acre feet per year. So slightly below our allocation. The Cayugas water supply project allocation equals 80% of the 1850 acre feet, or 1480, and the water supply allocation, no additional restriction. There is a shortage alert at this time. Staff does not anticipate a shortage of water supply for PHWA in the near future. However, once the safe yield of the basin has been identified and the groundwater sustainability plan, the GSP, has been adopted, mandatory reductions in groundwater pumping could occur. I think you're all aware of that issue. Those are ongoing negotiations, and that I'm attending now in Mr. Hickox's stead. The PHWA has historically been maximizing the United allocation in order to preserve the right to groundwater and because of its lower cost compared to state water. If PHWA were to take less groundwater today, the groundwater sustainability could lower our annual allocation because this agency would show that we can get by with less groundwater. If we show we can get by with less groundwater, then PHWA would be stuck with paying the higher price for the Casitas Municipal Water District water to offset the loss of United water. And there is no fiscal impact for the action of receive and file this report. And are there any questions this afternoon?
Once again, I probably don't know enough to ask the questions, but I'm going to anyway. The invoice that our water district gets shows a 20 to 80%, Callegas State Water Project versus United, in writing, but it doesn't break that out. This is what I've been told anyway. But on the invoicing, it doesn't say anything about how much was paid for United Water and how much was paid for state water projects. And state water project is a lot more expensive, as you know. So I guess I'd request that maybe we can make a motion that the invoices that in the future that go to Channel Islands include a percentage of how much we're paying for state water project and how much we're paying for United. And ancillary to that is I'd like to know how you actually derived those figures, because when we were out looking at the baseline testing at the plant, we couldn't find any mechanism to show how there wasn't a mixing valve. I'm sorry, I'm probably not using the right terminology, but we couldn't, nobody there from Port Hueneme could explain to us how it physically, how you mixed state water and how you mixed United Water and how much we got for demand. And I know Akbar could probably explain this better than I can, but it just help out somebody who represents ratepayers. If you could give me an explanation for that, I'd appreciate it.
We certainly can, I can certainly check with our operations people and get more information to you, but we can do that. But I think Akbar may be able to answer that question this afternoon more directly.
Yeah, so the short story here is, to Director Nass's point, is the water that's sold to each member agency of PHWA is a blended rate. There's no breakdown of, this is Callegas water, this is United Water, et cetera. And traditionally, we've all been fine with that arrangement, with the assumption that we're all getting some mix of 80-20, something in that ballpark. No one's measuring molecules, of course, but that's traditionally how it's been done. To Director Nass's point, what was recently found is kind of how this 80-20 mix operates in practice. And I think this is something that we need to address more on probably a longer term strategy, but I think it's worth at least bringing up now. The system is set up such that we use United Water and we push it out from the plant on a consistent basis. And that Callegas water really only comes in to meet those peak demands. And those of you who've been on the board for quite some time probably understand or are aware of how this works. You would think that peak demands occur middle of the summer, middle of the day, on a Saturday when people are recreating, et cetera. However, what we later came to learn is that the peak demands are actually happening during the weekdays at night, in the middle of the night. The reason being is that the water tanks off of serving Magoo are filling up in the night, which is very common for water tanks because that's typically when pumping charges are the least expensive. So for the users not named Magoo, you can understand how maybe there's a little heartache there. That, hey, all the expensive water that we're paying for, that 20%, is not actually going to the residential users, but in fact, most of it is going to fill up water tanks in Magoo, and they're getting the really high quality water that the rest of us are paying for. In terms of how to address this, again, as Mr. Villafana pointed to, we probably need to consult the operators on the ground. My hunch is that it would be some combination of some operational changes in addition to some capital improvements that would help address this issue in the future.
Does anybody else on the board that have any questions or observations? One of the things is, first of all, let me caveat, but I worked for the Navy for 40 years. I don't think they need to be subsidized. So.
Well, some of this is operational, and so right now that is not occurring. I mean, to start with, the energy price is less at night, and so that's why that would occur. Right now, our Point Magoo Building 13 pumps are down, and so we're manually operating the third pump, and that's happening on a kind of a swing shift. It's not happening in the middle of the night. Now, when we fix the pumps, then that will revert back. But that's just a reminder that these things aren't static. You know, any of our systems can have an upset condition, and then we respond to that.
Yeah, my recommendation to the board, at least for today's purposes, is since this is not an agendized item, is I'm glad Director Nast has kind of put this on the table. Those of us that are at the monthly operational meetings, we can kind of continue this as a standing item that we can address in the future. And to Director Nordahl's point, you know, this may be able to be addressed operationally without having to actually build or invest in any sort of new capital infrastructure. But I think just getting the conversation started for today is a good start.
So, Madam Chair? Yeah, so would it be then the board's wish to put this on a future agenda to get a little bit more information? I mean, a presentation and all? Would that be coming from Mr. Yeah, go ahead.
Right. We'd, once the board passes a motion and gives us direction, then I can talk to our operations people, confer with Akbar, come up with a plan how to capture the information that the board would like to get, and then I can report back to you as to a timeline when we can present that information. So,
approximately how long are you talking about? A month?
I don't know, depending on what you want us to do. If you give us some direction, then I have to talk to our operations people. It would probably be, I would say, depending on what it is, I would say us coming back in June.
I think just to kind of maybe provide better context than what I gave today, kind of on the spot, just to provide an information item to the board. Both Director Villafana and I can put that together at the June 18th meeting, at least just for purposes of information, and then if there's any follow-up action from that, we can schedule that for a follow-up meeting.
So we're saying to put it as an informational for next month.
Item on the agenda, so I would support something like that, yeah.
I think that would be in order. Also, just based upon a layman's inspection when we were there for the baseline water testing, you had a couple of valves there that looked like they were there since Christ was a corporal. If they could add something on to this where it would be a functional and physical configuration audit, where we could look into, do we need to update any of the equipment on the brackish water reclamation to bring it more into state of the art? I think that we've come a long way with RO, and I think that we're looking at some old facilities that need to be looked at.
Sounds like you're asking for two different things. So
I am.
If I could, yes. So with this first one, I would then move that we would ask our water agency to have an informational report back to us, and if it's not June, maybe it's July, but whatever the staff could handle, because we are down one, so to speak, right now. So that's what I would make as a motion.
Any discussion?
Yes,
okay,
that's good.
Motion and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 5 there.
If I may, before we wrap this item up, Director Schnapp, Director Nast, I think to your last point, Director Nast, regarding aged equipment and stuff like that, one thing that we have discussed at a recent operations meeting is the idea of a condition assessment, and that's, I think, supported on all sides of the table. It's just to get a professional, an expert to come in there and do an assessment of the age of the equipment and what needs to be replaced, where our dollars can be best spent to promote the longevity of the PHWA facility. So that's something that would likely be included as part of the upcoming budget, probably on the capital side, that we would then get done sometime during fiscal year 2019.
I would support something like that, yeah, in the budget, yeah.
Okay. All right, going on to our next, it is Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, and according to this, Akbar.
Yeah, I have a PowerPoint for this one, so I'm going to stand if you don't mind. Kind of switch seats here. Okay, so regarding the groundwater sustainability plan, it's a story that's been going on for a long time. I felt it was kind of time for an update on what staff has been up to. We get this question a lot, not only in this room, but also at the Beach District board meetings, is what the heck are you guys doing behind the scenes? So I wanted to kind of give you all an update on what has been going on. And Don and I have attended most of those meetings together. There's some that I attend elsewhere, but generally him and I have been part of the discussion group. So I want to first start off by refreshing everyone's memory on what all these acronyms mean. We throw around these kind of three-lettered acronyms, and maybe some people feel like it's too late to ask what they mean, but it's never too late. So first one, it's the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This was the piece of legislation that was passed in 2014 by the state. They said all your overdrafted and critically overdrafted basins are going to get into compliance by 2020 sometime. For the really critical ones, 2018, and for the less critical ones, 2024, 2026. And what that piece of legislation did is it said we're going to create groundwater sustainability agencies, GSAs for short. And in some cases, the biggest water agency in the area kind of took that role upon itself. If there wasn't one, they created new agencies in some cases. For us here in Ventura County, we already have an agency that kind of oversees the basin, and that's the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency. So now the Fox Canyon GMA is also the GSA for Ventura County, or for the Oxnard Basin. And those two terms are, in the future, probably going to be used synonymously, and they are very, very close together in terms of the letters used, which makes things even more confusing. From the GMA, or which is now the GSA, they say we're going to draft and adopt a groundwater sustainability plan, or GSP. This is the document that shows how we're going to get into compliance by 2040. And the two parties that have to fight over how this GSP is developed and what eventually gets into it are the agricultural users and the municipal and industrial users, which is the group that we're a part of, and we use the term M&I for short to refer to this group. And that M&I user team consists of a few different groups, several cities: City of Ventura, City of Oxnard, City of Camarillo, Camarosa Water District, and all of the PHWA member agencies. And very recently, we've invited United Water Conservation District to kind of join the conversation. The reason being is that when we eventually submit our proposal to the Fox Canyon GMA, along with those 5 signatures that you see up there, if it has United's on that proposal as well, it's going to carry a lot of weight with the GMA staff to think that, okay, not only do these 5 cities, as they call it, get along, they've actually gotten the support of they've gotten the support of United Water Conservation District as well. And so we're hoping that with their participation, there's some greater likelihood of getting our language into the final GSP. So how does this process actually work? So right now you have 2 parties kind of developing their own white paper proposal. That's what's been going on this past year. Ag has submitted their proposal in February, and it's important to note that when they submit their proposal, it's not like all the ag members get along with it. It's kind of like this is the best we can all agree on. Some people going into it kicking and screaming. There's even some who are still publicly making not so kind comments about the proposal that they belong to. The second group, M&I, I like to think that our group is a little bit more agreeable. While we have had our discussions and we have some disagreements here and there, by and large, we tend to agree on most aspects of the M&I proposal. The current M&I proposal, which was just submitted to Fox Canyon staff as of Friday of last week, was developed by myself, Tony Stafford, who's the general manager for Camarosa, and Keith Lemieux, who's the special counsel for Oxnard. Three of us drafted that first draft. That was then circulated to all parties, including those members of the Navy, and that was then sent to Fox Canyon GMA last week. So let me scoot back for a second. Fox Canyon GMA is going to get these two proposals, and then they're going to develop a draft GSP, which we're eventually going to see in the fall. So what's actually included in our proposal? First off, we are proposing all this with the assumption that we're going to start at least 100,000 acre feet of current extraction. So right now, extractions are around the neighborhood of 100,000 to 120,000 acre feet in the Oxnard Basin. We're going to pretend that we're going to stay at this level and work our way down from there. Next, that 100,000 acre feet is going to be divided, it's not on the bullet, excuse me, but it's going to be divided 60% to the agricultural community, 40% to the municipal and industrial users. And that 60-40 split, that one bullet point, if it were up on the screen, took about 18 months to figure out. Just arriving at that percentage. So I don't want to belittle or trivialize that point whatsoever. That one little point took many, many people about 18 months to arrive at. So once we have our 40%, we're going to divide that amongst all the M&I users based on the T period, that 2003 to 2012 period. And T, for those of you who don't recall, that's the temporary extraction allocation period. And this is the piece of local legislation that actually constricted how much water we could extract from the basin. Ag doesn't actually have to follow that same formula. How they divvy up their 60%, we're completely agnostic to. We don't care, we're indifferent. However, when it comes to our 40%, we're going to use this 9-year period to divvy up that pie amongst us. And then as far as how we actually go from 100,000 acre feet down to whatever our sustainable yield ends up being, which will likely end up in the realm of 50 to 60,000 acre feet, that's what we're hearing kind of right now. Again, we won't know until the fall. There's many ways to do that. You can do it kind of a exponential slope downward. You can make it a balloon payment where you stay high and then drop off a cliff. You can kind of do the step down thing, you know, every 5 years. We decided to propose the very simple route, which is just go linear every year, divide it by an equal amount, and come down by that amount every year. And the last point on this one is there is a water market that's being developed amongst the agricultural community in Ventura County. And the folks at Cal Lutheran have developed all these kind of complicated models on how this market's going to be worked out. They've pitched this to the agricultural community, and what the M&I users are saying is, hey, water is water. Why can't we participate in this water market too? And I think that's kind of a valid claim. And we hope to be included in that water market, and we wanted to include that point for that very reason. Flexibility. This was a big point of contention for the agricultural community. They wanted to be able to have some flexibility from year to year to pump low, pump high, not be tied to these very stringent requirements on how much they can extract from year to year, especially because most of their water use is dependent on rainfall and surface water availability. So they wanted to have that flexibility from year to year. The M&I group said, fine, we're okay with that, but with some rules. And these are the 4 rules we've kind of come up with, and the 4th one's kind of a repeat of what you saw on the previous slide. Number 1 is that you can carry over any unused allocation into a future year. So you can bank anything that you don't use. However, the amount that you can then cash in has a limit. So let's say you save up stuff for 10 years and you're sitting on this gold mine of credits. You can't cash them all in year 11. You can only cash in the amount equal to what your current year's allocation is. So for example, let's say in year 10, my total allocation is 1,000 acre feet. I can only cash in 1,000 more acre feet from my bank. I can't cash in, say, 11,000 that I banked all at once. And you can kind of understand why from a basin health standpoint. And third one, this is essentially canceling the idea of any sort of anyone using the credit card essentially to borrow water in advance. And this was to prevent any sort of farming practice where you could use up a parcel's 20-year allotment all in one shot and then skip town. And now you've left that parcel without water for the next 20 years, and that's essentially fallowed land that's useless. Because sometimes the farmer that's actually farming there doesn't actually own the land. They're an operator, if you will. So where do we go from here? This was delivered to GMA staff just last week, like I said. My plan is to present the actual language of that and append it to a staff report at our next meeting, so you all can see it in your packet. And if there are any questions to the full text of it, we can discuss those then. The draft GSP will be available in October, so they say. At this point, it's looking rather suspect of whether that actually come true. And then in spring of 2019, we're hoping to adopt that GSP. All of this is barring anybody throwing a match on the fireworks pile and claiming adjudication, which obviously would be the worst case scenario for I think all parties. It's the poison pill, if you will. So if everything goes according to plan, this is the timeline that we can expect going forward. And if there's any questions, I can take those now.
Questions? No questions. Okay.
So it's to receive and file.
Yes, okay.
Great. So I recommend, I move to receive and file the report.
Second. All right, and next. Excuse me, yeah. We have a agency agenda staff report.
Yes, Chairman Spiegel and members of the board. We wanted to present a proposal, a recommendation to the board this evening. As has been mentioned a few times earlier this evening, Steve Hickox, longtime city employee and PHWA employee, he had been threatening to retire for a couple of years, and he finally took the plunge and left us on April 30th. So as we started to think about all of the transitional challenges that brings, right as that discussion started between Mr. Villafana and myself, Akbar came forward and made a recommendation that we would like to recommend as a one-year trial plan this evening, and that would be to have the PHWA pick up 20% of Mr. Ali Khan's salary and benefits in exchange for a greater role in which Mr. Ali Khan would do a lot of the water organizational representation work that Mr. Hickox was doing as all these important negotiations go forward and as these different regional water discussions progress over the next year. I'm going to ask him to, Mr. Ali Khan, to jump in and provide any additional details to this that he may want to. We think it would be a good way for the at least two of the agencies that are currently part of the JPA to expand their partnership by giving a greater role to Channel Islands as their general manager takes a greater role in representing the agency as a whole in this series of regional discussions. It does not mean that Don Villafana and the city will play no role in any of this. Don will be attending many of these meetings. He will still be speaking on behalf of the city, representing the city, but we know the reality of his schedule right now and the things that are on his plate are going to make it difficult for him to be as active and as present as Mr. Hickox was when he was still on board. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Ali Khan, and he can provide any additional detail. Again, Mr. Villafana and I'll throw in Mr. Charles Green, our agency counsel, are recommending this on a one-year trial basis, and that will give us some time to complete the recruitment for Mr. Hickox's permanent replacement, which we expect now will be done by September or October of this year, and then allow some time for that individual to get settled in, especially if it's someone from outside the Ventura County area. They're going to need some time to get up to speed on all these regional issues. So we think a year will be a good length for a trial period.
Thank you, Mr. Butler. First off, I just want to preface this by just saying I'm particularly proud of the relationship both Rod and the other staff, along with myself and my deputy, Pete Martinez, have developed over the last 6 months, and to that, even actually a year now. You know, JPAs in general are kind of tough business sometimes. It's a marriage, really, and like most marriages, I hear, it takes communication. So the monthly meetings that we're all a part of, they really go a long way in making sure that all parties are up to speed. There's no surprises. We talk out our differences and our agreements. And it has been a really fruitful exercise so far. Chair Spiegel has been there for many of those meetings, and I hope you can personally attest that it's been a fruitful exercise so far. The action in front of you tonight, I think it serves two purposes. First is to address an immediate need, as Mr. Butler pointed to. And with Mr. Hickox's departure, I have been able to position myself prior to his departure as one of the leaders on the M&I team that I was just discussing in the previous item. And with that comes the ability to kind of update this board on any developments on that front. So the GSP is one thing. In addition to that, there's a scope of other items kind of listed there on page 18 of the packet with respect to Fox Canyon, Callegas, United meetings, and then others that pop up as necessary. So putting all those aside, there's that one item which is just addressing the immediate needs, and then there's a second longer term one that I think is even more important, and that is anything that I think we can do to kind of foster and maintain a good relationship between the agencies of this JPA, I think is a worthwhile undertaking. And my hunch, we're going to try this out for a year and see how it goes. While it is a trial basis to see how it goes, I hope that it is successful and we kind of continue this as long as this board is willing to entertain the idea. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions, and I hope this board will approve the recommendation in front of them.
Akbar, I didn't see your resume in the package. Are we scheduled for interviews soon to wrap this up? I agree. This is much more than a marriage of convenience. It's great to be able to have that kind of collaboration so that now you become a greater sense of ownership than perhaps you have now. And that's the kind of relationship that I was hoping to see over time, and this is a great opportunity. And if I understand what I've heard here is that it's a one-year trial period, but it may end up being a really great marriage. And there would be that opportunity for a continuation of this kind of arrangement. Am I reading into that correctly? Is that what we're doing here?
Correct.
Okay.
Sure, yeah, I think we'd definitely be open to extending it if things go smoothly during this period.
And to your point, and this was kind of the setup as devised by our city council or our agency council, and that is that the budget itself would provide the vehicle or the mechanism whereby this agency gets to decide whether to continue that arrangement or not.
Great. Well, I guess it's a little late to say welcome aboard. You already are, but I love the idea of you taking on a broader role, so I'm all in favor.
Anyway.
Did somebody have a motion? Do we make a motion for this, or?
I just had, with that one caveat, you haven't seen Akbar's application. We have. It's outstanding. And that's one of the reservations we have, is when you have good young people that are competent and on the rise, you want to keep them, but you don't want to hold them back either. So I want to make sure that that 20% doesn't get spread too thin.
Understood.
Okay, that was my only caveat.
Very good.
Well, I'll make the motion, if there's nothing else here,
And I'll second
to approve the contract.
And I'll second it.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? 5-1, 5-9.
Yeah, 5-0.
Okay. Sorry, folks. Okay. Regular meeting. Back to where we are. I gotta get there. Okay. At this point, we're at board member reports and comments.
I don't have anything.
If I might.
Sure.
And you're probably in the best position to answer this question, is that we embarked on a strategic planning process, really kind of riding the coattails of the Community Services District. Where are we? And maybe Mr. Villafana, you can chip in as well. Is it because the city was kind of taking on the responsibility of sifting through all the analysis that the district did, and then to see to what extent we have some sort of commonality that we could pursue a joint long-range plan. So can you help me out here as what happened to that initiative? It seemed to me it's been several months since we've heard anything.
Yeah, so the last action that was taken, feel free.
Yeah, we, quite honestly, I don't have much knowledge or background in that. It's something that I'm going to have to research some files on, and you know, I'd have to talk to Akbar and see what they've produced so far. But I have not seen documents yet. I'll have to research that and get back to you on that from our side.
Well, perhaps that is a matter of information at our next meeting, if that's possible. That'd be great.
Sure,
We'll do that.
Just the small snippet I can offer today is that the most recent action that the consultant took was doing the same exercise that the Beach District Board went through. You did the same thing here at the City Council level. I believe one or two of the City Council members actually absent maybe that meeting. They did a separate questionnaire. The engineer went back and actually put those results together. At this point, it's simply a matter of PHWA staff asking them, can you develop a scope, present that to us, to blend those two studies together and figure out where there is alignment. And that's the point we're at now. So it's a matter of a phone call or an email to the consultant and just saying, hey, please provide a scope and we'll consider it at a future meeting.
Do you need direction, a formal direction from this body to
No, it's something
bring that about?
staff could handle to present a scope, yeah.
Great.
We'll work together and get that as an informational item for the June meeting.
Great, thank you.
That should be a long one. Okay. CIB, CSD, General Manager's reports and comments.
Thank you, Chair Spiegel. I just want to mention 3 quick items. First off, there was several pieces of proposed legislation that are going through the state right now, or kind of in the works, not only on the ballot, but just making its way through the state legislature. Director Nass, Director Berg, you were both present at the last AWA meeting this past week. There are at least 4 pieces of legislation, 3 of them aimed at assisting low-income individuals with water rates. I think it's important that this board not necessarily take action at this point, but just are aware of kind of what's developing. So I'd like to, with the permission of our fellow staff, just say that it'd be nice to go over some of those developments at the next board meeting. Secondly, we talked about baseline testing at our last meeting, saying we'd present the results. Unfortunately, those weren't quite ready from the folks that took the tests. So we'll have those ready for you all at the June 18th meeting. And then lastly, United Water Conservation District, you may have heard of about the manganese and iron removal facility. That was scheduled for approval at their last meeting. However, it got moved to a future meeting. So we'll report back on when that eventually gets approved. Suffice it to say that if and when that does get constructed, it would mean a lot for the water quality for PHWA recipients in the way of membranes that wouldn't get clogged up when we turn them on and things of that nature. So that's big news for us, and we'll report back when we hear more.
Okay, thank you. And since we did with our, new business to be agendized. We already mentioned
We have a
that.
couple of items, it
Yes.
sounds like, yeah.
Okay, so it's down on the record. And at that point,
Yeah,
Ready?
yeah, I think we caught everything during the discussion, so we made a note of that, and we'll.
very good. Time to go home? No, you got a meeting to go to.
Open forum.
Oh, we had an open forum.
Oh, did you call for it already?
Yes. But I'll call for it. Good night.
All right.
I like your stuff. Good night.